I raised my grandson like a son, and this is how he repaid me when he turned 18. My name is Carol, and for the last 17 years and 51 weeks, my world has revolved around my grandson, Leo. I am 58 years old now, with hands that show the work of 2 lifetimes and a heart that has beaten for him more than it has for myself. When people ask, I do not say I raised him. That word feels too clinical, too detached. I tell them the truth. I was his mother in every way except for the biological act of giving birth. I was the one who woke for 3 a.m. feedings when my own daughter could not, the one who kissed scraped knees, the one who sat in the front row of every terrible school play, beaming with a pride so fierce it felt like it could power the entire town. Our little house, the one I thought I would be retiring in alone, became his sanctuary, filled with the scent of my baking and the sound of his video games. It all started with a frantic phone call on a Tuesday night. My daughter, Sarah, was on the other end, her voice a tangled mess of desperation and substances I did not want to name. She was only 21, a child herself in many ways, and she had a baby she could not care for. She spoke of dreams, of finding herself, of needing to be free from the anchor of responsibility. I listened, my heart breaking for her, for the life she could not manage, but mostly for the tiny, innocent life caught in her storm. That night, she brought him to my door in a car seat that smelled of cigarette smoke. A beautiful, silent baby with my eyes and a future that was a complete unknown. I took him into my arms, and in that moment, I made a silent vow to him that I would be the rock his mother could not be. The first few years were a blur of diapers, formula, and an exhaustion so profound I sometimes felt I was moving through a dream. My friends were planning cruises and taking up pottery. I was learning the different cries of an infant and clipping coupons to make my modest pension stretch. I drained a significant portion of my retirement savings without a second thought, trading a future of comfortable travel for a present filled with first steps, first words, and the unparalleled joy of a small hand fitting perfectly into mine. He called me Nana, but the role I played was that of a full-time, all-in parent. I was the one who taught him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike, and to say please and thank you, building a foundation of stability and love, brick by painful, beautiful brick. As he grew, the financial sacrifices became more significant, but I never let him feel the strain. When he needed braces, I took on a part-time cleaning job at the local library. My evenings spent in the quiet company of books and the smell of floor polish. When he wanted to join the soccer team, I sold my mother's old jewelry, pieces I had treasured, to pay for his cleats and uniform. These were not burdens to me. They were choices. They were investments in his happiness and his future. My life had been reoriented entirely around his needs, my own wants and desires fading into a distant background hum. My world had shrunk to the size of our small town, but it felt vast and meaningful because he was at the center of it. Sarah would drift in and out of our lives like a ghost, her visits infrequent and chaotic. She would show up with cheap, inappropriate gifts and promises she could never keep, leaving Leo confused and heartbroken in her wake. I was the one who had to manage his expectations, to soothe his disappointment, and to explain, in gentle terms a child could understand, that his mother loved him in her own broken way, but that her love could not be relied upon. Each visit was a small tornado that I had to clean up after, reinforcing my role as the constant, the safe harbor in his tumultuous emotional sea. I never spoke ill of her to him, choosing instead to be the quiet, steady presence that he could always count on, the one who would never, ever leave. The teenage years arrived, and with them a new set of challenges. Leo was a good kid, quiet and studious, a testament to the stable environment I had fought so hard to create. He had a tight-knit group of friends and did well in school, but like any teenager, he began to pull away, seeking his own identity outside the cozy bubble of our home. He spent more time in his room with headphones on, our long conversations replaced with one-word answers. I understood this was natural, a necessary part of growing up, but a small part of me ached with the distance. I tried to stay connected, making his favorite meals and showing interest in his music, all while giving him the space he craved. Now he is on the cusp of 18, the man I have built from a broken beginning. I look at him and see a bright future. He has been accepted into a good state college, and I have been setting aside every spare dollar I have to help him with his tuition and expenses. We planned a small celebration for his birthday, just a simple barbecue in the backyard with his closest friends, and a cake I would bake from scratch, the same chocolate cake I have made for him every year since he was 3. My pride in him is a physical presence, a warmth that fills my chest. I see his 18th birthday not as an ending, but as a graduation for both of us. My job is done. I have successfully guided him to the shores of adulthood. A week before his birthday, the mail arrived as usual. Tucked between the bills and the grocery store flyers was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was addressed not to me, but to Mr. Leo Maxwell in a formal, typewritten font. It bore the return address of a law firm from a city 2 states away, a place we had no connection to. I felt a strange, cold knot tighten in my stomach, a primal sense of foreboding I could not explain. I placed the letter on the small table in the entryway where he always left his keys, my mind racing with 100 different terrible possibilities. I would not invade his privacy by opening it, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was inside that envelope was about to change everything. Leo came home a couple of hours later, the slam of the front door and the thud of his backpack on the floor announcing his arrival in the usual way. He grunted a greeting as he headed for the kitchen, his mind already on the after-school snack he considered a constitutional right. I was in the living room, pretending to read a magazine, but my eyes kept flicking to the cream-colored envelope on the entry table. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I tried to sound casual when I called out to him, my voice a little higher than I intended. I told him there was some important-looking mail for him, trying to inject a note of lightness into my tone, as if it were probably just a fancy college recruitment letter. He ambled out of the kitchen, a half-eaten apple in his hand, and stopped short when he saw it. He picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. He was usually so dismissive of anything that was not on a screen, but the weight and quality of the paper seemed to command his respect. I watched him trace the raised lettering of the law firm's address with his thumb, a frown creasing his brow. He said, "I don't know anyone in Charleston," more to himself than to me. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy with my unspoken anxiety. He tore it open, not with the carelessness of a teenager, but with a strange, deliberate precision. The sound of the paper ripping was unnaturally loud in our small, quiet house. He pulled out a thick sheaf of documents and began to read, his back partially turned to me as he leaned against the wall. I watched the color drain from his face. His usual teenage slouch straightened, and the hand holding the apple dropped to his side, forgotten. His eyes scanned the pages, moving back and forth rapidly, as if he could not believe what they were telling him. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. I wanted to ask what was wrong, to rush to his side and comfort him. But I was frozen in my chair, paralyzed by the feeling that I was witnessing the end of a world I had so carefully constructed. He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide and unfocused, as if he were looking at a stranger. "Nana," he whispered, his voice cracking, "you are not going to believe this." He stumbled into the living room and sank onto the sofa opposite me, the papers trembling in his hand. He told me the letter was from the estate of a man named Richard Maxwell, his paternal grandfather, the father of the man who had disappeared from my daughter's life before Leo was even born, a man whose name I barely knew. Richard Maxwell had passed away 6 weeks ago, A wealthy man, apparently, and a lonely one. He had spent the last decade of his life trying to locate his only grandson. He had found him, it seemed, just a little too late to meet him in person. The letter was a formal notification from his lawyers, a preamble to the last will and testament of a man Leo had never even known existed. The will was straightforward and shocking in its generosity. Upon his 18th birthday, which was now just 6 days away, Leo was to become the sole beneficiary of the Maxwell estate. This included a trust fund containing a sum of money that made my jaw drop when he read the number aloud. It was more than I had earned in my entire life, more than I could even properly comprehend. It also included the deed to a 4-bedroom house on the coast in South Carolina, a late-model luxury car currently sitting in its garage, and a portfolio of investments managed by the firm. It was a complete, pre-packaged life, handed to him on a silver platter by a dead man's ghost. Leo's shock quickly melted into a dazed, euphoric excitement. He sprang up from the couch and began pacing the small living room, running his hands through his hair. "A house on the coast, Nana? Can you believe it? A car! I won't need to save up for that old clunker we saw. And the money! I can go to any college I want. I don't even have to worry about a student loan. I could travel. I could do anything." His words tumbled out, a waterfall of dreams and possibilities, each one taking him further and further away from the small life we had shared. He was a rocket ship igniting its thrusters, and I was the launch pad he was about to leave behind forever. I tried to smile, to share in his joy. I told him it was wonderful, that it was incredible news, but my words felt like ash in my mouth. A cold dread was spreading through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. This was not just about money. It was about a family, a history, a whole world that was opening up to him, a world that had nothing to do with me. I had been his entire universe for so long, and in the space of 10 minutes, I had been demoted to a small, forgotten moon. The college fund I had sacrificed for, the part-time job, the sold heirlooms, all of it was rendered meaningless, a pathetic little pile of pebbles next to this mountain of gold. The first real crack appeared later that evening. As we sat down for dinner, a simple meatloaf and potatoes I had made, he looked down at his plate and then back at me. "You know," he said with an air of newfound authority, "the lawyers want me to come down to Charleston after my birthday to sign the final papers. They said there are some of Richard's, my grandfather's, personal effects to go through. They said he left a lot of journals." He looked at me, and for a second I thought I saw the old Leo, my Leo, but then he said it. "I guess I won't need that college money you've been saving after all. You should use it for yourself. Maybe take one of those cruises you used to talk about." It was meant to sound kind, a grand gesture from a benevolent new king, but it felt like a severance package. The days that followed were thick with a strange new tension. The easy silence that had once comfortably filled the spaces between our conversations was gone, replaced with a humming static of unspoken things. Leo was physically present, but his spirit was already 2 states away in a mansion on the coast. He spent hours on his phone, not texting friends or scrolling through social media, but having hushed, serious conversations with a man named Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer from the firm. I would hear snippets as I passed his room: fiduciary responsibilities, probate court, asset liquidation. These were words from a foreign language, the vocabulary of a life I had no part in, and they erected an invisible wall between us, brick by incomprehensible brick. He was becoming a man of means and business, and I was just the woman who still made his lunch. His excitement was a raw, palpable thing, and it spilled over into every corner of our small home. He would pace the hallway, phone to his ear, describing the house in Charleston to his friends based on a link the lawyer had sent him. "It has a pool," I heard him exclaim, his voice ringing with joy I had not heard since he was a little boy on Christmas morning.
And a 3-car garage. Dude, we have to take a road trip. I stood in the kitchen, my hands deep in soapy water, listening to him plan a future that sounded bright and loud and completely devoid of me. My own plans, the ones that involved him coming home for holidays from the state college, a pile of his laundry in a corner, seemed to shrink and fade, becoming flimsy, sepia-toned photographs of a life that would never be. His attempts at generosity became more frequent and more painful. He started talking about money with a casualness that felt like a slap in the face. "You know, Nana, you should really get that roof fixed," he said one evening while we watched television. "I can just write you a check for it next week." He seemed to believe this was a magnanimous gesture, the act of a dutiful, wealthy grandson. He could not understand that every sacrifice I made, every extra shift I worked to pay for a repair, was an act of love. He was offering to erase my struggle with a checkbook, to pave over the 17 years of my life's work with his newfound unearned cash, and it cheapened every single moment of it. I had given him my life, and he was trying to pay me back with a home improvement loan.
The ghost of Richard Maxwell grew larger with each passing day. Leo found a few articles about him online, detailing the success of his construction business. He printed a grainy photo of a stern-looking man in a suit and taped it to the mirror in his bedroom. "My grandfather was a self-made man," he would say, as if he were reciting a sacred text. "He built his company from the ground up." He spoke of this stranger with a reverence he had never afforded me. I had built a boy from the ground up. I had constructed a safe and loving world for him out of wreckage. But my labor was invisible, domestic, and female. It could not compete with the tangible, masculine legacy of blueprints and bank accounts. As the week wore on, I held on to the idea of his birthday barbecue like a life raft. It was our tradition. It was the one thing that felt real and solid in this new, shifting landscape. I imagined the familiar scene, his friends in the backyard, the smell of burgers on the grill, the chocolate cake with 18 candles. On Thursday, 3 days before his birthday, I finally broached the subject. I asked him what time his friends were coming over on Sunday so I could make sure I had enough food. He stopped scrolling on his phone and looked at me, a flicker of something I could not quite read in his eyes. He hesitated, and in that small pause, my heart began to sink. "About that," he started, and my stomach plummeted. "I was thinking, a backyard barbecue feels a little, a little young, maybe?" He said it gently, as if he were trying to spare my feelings, but the words were daggers. "This is a big deal, turning 18 and all this." He gestured vaguely around the room, encompassing the letter, the inheritance, his entire new identity. "I was thinking maybe we could do something else. Some of the guys and I were talking about driving into the city and going to that nice steakhouse downtown. My treat, of course." He was canceling our life, our traditions, and offering to pay for the funeral. My voice was quiet when I finally found it. All I could manage to say was, "I've already bought the decorations." It was a pathetic, small protest, and I knew it. He gave me a pitying look, the kind you might give a child who does not understand why they cannot have ice cream for breakfast. "Nana, it's just a party. We can do something else, just the two of us, another time." But there would be no other time. This was it. This was the moment of transition. He was shedding his old life, and me along with it. The final crushing blow came a moment later, delivered with the same casual, thoughtless finality. "Besides," he said, looking back at his phone, "I have to be up early Monday to drive to Charleston. Mr. Abernathy has a lot for me to sign. My new life is waiting." His 18th birthday arrived not with a celebration,
but with a quiet, suffocating sense of finality. The happy birthday banner I had bought remained in its plastic packaging on the kitchen counter, a sad, colorful ghost of the party that never was. I woke up early, as I always did on his birthday, my body still programmed to the rhythm of our traditions. I went into the kitchen and started mixing the batter for his chocolate cake, my hands moving on autopilot. It felt like a defiant act, a refusal to accept that everything had changed. The familiar scent of cocoa filled the air, a fragrance that for 17 years had meant joy and celebration, but today it just smelled like yesterday. Leo slept late, a privilege of youth and, I suppose, of new wealth. When he finally emerged from his room around noon, he was already dressed to go out. He was wearing a new button-down shirt that I had never seen before, one he must have bought on a recent trip to the mall with his friends. It was crisp and stylish, and it made him look older, like a stranger in my house. He gave me a quick, distracted hug and a "thanks for the birthday wishes, Nana," his eyes already scanning the room for his car keys and wallet. The cake sat on the counter, frosted and perfect, with a single unlit candle in the center. He glanced at it but said nothing, his mind clearly on the steakhouse in the city. I wanted to say something, to stop him, to tell him how much this day meant to me. I wanted to remind him of all the birthdays that came before this one. The one when he turned 5 and I sewed him a superhero cape that he refused to take off for a week. The one when he turned 10 and I surprised him with tickets to a Major League Baseball game, a splurge that meant I ate pasta for a month. The one when he turned 16 and we sat together in the sterile DMV, both of us more nervous than we would admit, before he got his license. All of those moments, all of those sacrifices and joys felt like they were being erased by the allure of a fancy meal he was paying for with a dead man's money. But the words would not come. What could I say? That my love was worth more than his grandfather's fortune? That a homemade cake held more value than a perfectly cooked filet mignon? He would see it as emotional blackmail, as me trying to make him feel guilty on his big day. He was a newly minted adult, flush with independence and cash, and he would not understand. To him, my feelings were probably just an inconvenient relic of his old life, a piece of emotional baggage he was eager to leave behind at the station. So I said nothing. I just smiled a brittle, paper-thin smile and wished him a good time with his friends, the taste of unshed tears sharp in the back of my throat. He was gone for most of the day. The house was quieter than it had ever been. The silence was not peaceful. It was a heavy, aching void. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the walls of the life I had built. His bedroom door was ajar, and I peeked inside. The grainy photo of Richard Maxwell was still taped to his mirror, and I felt a surge of resentment so powerful it made me dizzy. This man, this ghost, had done nothing. He had not soothed a single fever, attended a single parent-teacher conference, or lost a single night's sleep, worrying. Yet he was being canonized as the great patriarch, the benevolent founder of Leo's new life, while I was being relegated to a footnote. I spent the afternoon packing. Not my things, but his. It was a practical necessity. He was leaving for Charleston in the morning, but it felt like a ritual of surrender. I folded the t-shirts I had bought him, the ones he was now too sophisticated for. I packed the worn jeans with the patched knees, relics of a less prosperous time. I wrapped his old childhood drawings in tissue paper, a small bundle of memories that he would probably never look at again. With each item I placed in his suitcases, I felt like I was packing away a piece of myself, a piece of the life we had shared. It was a slow, methodical heartbreak, performed in the crushing silence of an empty house. He came home late that night, long before I had gone to bed. I heard his key in the lock, his soft footsteps on the stairs. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne in the city. I lay in the dark, my eyes wide open, listening to him move around in his room. I heard the rustle of his new clothes being discarded, the zip of the suitcases I had packed for him. For a moment, I thought he might come to my door. I thought he might say goodnight, like he used to when he was a little boy. I held my breath, waiting, hoping for a sign that my Leo was still in there somewhere, underneath the new shirt and the newfound wealth.
The sign never came. The light under his door went out, and the house fell silent once more. I knew then, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as a block of ice in my chest, that this was it. This was the repayment. It was not a grand, cool gesture. It was not a hateful argument or a dramatic storming out. It was a quiet, insidious erasure. It was the birthday cake left uneaten on the counter. It was the silence where a thank you should have been. It was the casual discarding of 17 years of devotion in favor of a future he had not earned and a man he had never met. My payment was to be forgotten. The morning was gray and damp, the sky mirroring the bleakness in my soul. I was up before dawn, the habit of a lifetime, and the smell of fresh coffee did nothing to lift my spirits. The packed suitcases were already by the front door, standing like two silent, solemn sentinels guarding the exit to his old life. I looked at them and felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were a guest in my own home, a temporary caretaker waiting for the real owner to arrive. Leo had already inherited the world, and it seemed he had started with this small house, rendering my own place in it obsolete. He came downstairs an hour later, looking rested and ready. There was a bright, energetic hum about him, the unmistakable energy of someone about to embark on a great adventure. He grabbed a granola bar from the pantry, eschewing the eggs and toast I had planned to make for him. "No time for a big breakfast, Nana," he said, his mouth already full. "Mr. Abernathy wants to meet me for lunch, and it's a long drive." He spoke of the lawyer with a familiar ease, as if this man he had known for a week was now a more central figure in his life than the woman who had fed him for 17 years. The casual dismissal of a final shared meal was a small cut, but it was one of 1,000 that were slowly bleeding me dry. I followed him to the door, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. This was the moment I had been dreading, the final goodbye. I had played it over and over in my head, imagining what I would say, what he would say. I had hoped for a flash of the old Leo, a moment of real connection, a heartfelt acknowledgement of everything we had shared. I stood there, clutching my robe, my mind a blank slate of pain, waiting for him to offer some final word of comfort or gratitude. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and picked up the suitcases, his movements efficient and unsentimental. He turned to me at the door, and for a fleeting second, his eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of something there. Was it guilt? Regret? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a determined, forward-looking resolve. "Well," he said, his voice bright and a little too loud for the quiet morning, "I guess this is it." He leaned in and gave me a swift, awkward hug, his body stiff. It was the hug you give a distant relative at a family gathering, an obligation to be fulfilled rather than an expression of genuine affection. It was over in a second, and then he was stepping back, creating a physical space between us that mirrored the emotional chasm that had opened up. "I'll call you when I get settled in," he said, the generic throwaway promise of someone who has no real intention of doing so. "And don't worry about anything, okay? I'll send you some money for that roof and whatever else you need. You've done enough." There it was again.
The offer of money as a solution, as a replacement for love and time and shared history. He saw my life's work as a debt that could be settled with a bank transfer. He did not understand that what he was taking from me, our connection, our shared life, his place in my heart, was priceless, and that his inheritance, as vast as it was, could never cover the cost. I watched from the doorway as he walked to his car, the old, reliable sedan I had helped him buy just 6 months ago. He tossed the suitcases into the back seat with a casual thud. He was leaving our car, his first car, here. The lawyer had arranged for a rental to be delivered for the one-way trip, and his new luxury vehicle was waiting for him in Charleston. Even the car, a symbol of his first taste of freedom that we had celebrated together, was being left behind like a shed skin. He was systematically divesting himself of every part of his old life, and I was just the largest, most cumbersome piece. As he started the engine, a memory ambushed me, so sharp and clear it stole my breath. Leo, age 7, crying in my arms after falling from his bike and chipping his front tooth. He had been terrified of the dentist, his small body trembling. I had held him, rocked him, and whispered promises that I would not leave his side, that everything would be okay. I had held his hand through the entire procedure, my own stomach in knots, absorbing his fear so he would not have to bear it alone. I had been his shield, his comfort, his safe place. And now, he was driving away without a backward glance, leaving me completely unprotected from the pain of his departure. He pulled out of the driveway, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, on the future. He did not look back. He did not wave. I stood on the porch, the cold morning air seeping into my bones, and watched the taillights of his car disappear around the corner. And then he was gone. The street was empty. The world was silent. The house behind me felt cavernous and hollow. I had poured every ounce of myself into raising that boy, into building him a life. I had given him my youth, my savings, my heart, and this is how he repaid me, not with malice or anger, but with something far more cruel, a complete and utter indifference. He had simply closed the door on his past, and I was on the wrong side of it. The first week of his absence was a study in phantom limbs. I would wake to the silence and for a disoriented moment think he was just sleeping in. I would instinctively cook enough dinner for 2, only to find myself staring at his empty place at the table. The extra food, a mocking testament to my solitude. I walked past his bedroom door 100 times a day, the closed door a constant, silent accusation. The house, which had been my sanctuary and the container of all my love, now felt like a mausoleum. Every object held a memory, and every memory was now tinged with the bitter taste of abandonment. The scuff marks on the wall in the hallway from his hockey bag, the chip in the coffee mug he always used, the faint smell of his shampoo that lingered in the bathroom, they were all tiny daggers to the heart. He did not call when he got to Charleston. The promise, as I had suspected, was an empty platitude designed to soften his exit. I knew he had arrived safely only because I saw a picture his friend tagged him in on social media. It was a photo of him, beaming, standing in front of an impossibly large white pillared house, the ocean sparkling behind him. He looked happy, carefree, and completely at home. In the comments, his friends were writing things like, "Living the dream," and "King of the castle." One comment from a girl I did not recognize simply said, "So glad you're finally where you belong." That line twisted in my gut. Was this where he belonged? Had my small, loving home just been a 17-year layover on his way to his real destination?
Days turned into a week, and the silence from his end was absolute. My initial hurt began to curdle into a slow-burning anger. an anger at him for his thoughtlessness, an anger at my daughter for creating this mess in the first place, an anger at this ghost, Richard Maxwell, for reaching out from the grave to snatch my grandson away with the lure of unearned riches. But mostly, I was angry at myself. I was angry for my naivety, for believing that love and sacrifice would be enough, that they would forge a bond that money could not break. I had been a fool, a sentimental old woman who had overestimated her own importance in the grand narrative of his life. The financial help he had promised arrived the following Friday. It was not a phone call or a personal check. It was a cold, impersonal bank transfer directly into my checking account. The notification popped up on my phone with a sterile chime. The amount was substantial, more than enough to fix the roof and then some. It was a clean, efficient transaction. He was settling his account. I stared at the number on the screen and I felt nothing but a profound emptiness. This was not a gift. It was a dismissal. It was his way of saying, "We're even now. You are no longer my responsibility." He had paid his bill and checked out of the hotel of my life. I transferred the full amount into my savings account and did not touch a penny of it. It felt like blood money. His friends, the same boys who had practically lived at my house for years, raiding my fridge and leaving muddy footprints on my floor, now treated me like a stranger. I saw a couple of them at the grocery store. They saw me, I know they did, but they quickly turned their heads and busied themselves with an intense study of the cereal aisle. They were his friends, loyal to him and his new, shiny life. I was a relic of his past, a reminder of a life he had outgrown. Their avoidance was a clear signal. I was no longer part of the inner circle. The community I had thought I was a part of, the one that revolved around Leo, had excommunicated me without a word. The loneliness was a physical weight. It pressed down on me in the mornings when I had no one to wake up for, and it sat beside me on the couch in the evenings, a silent, unwelcome companion. My own friends tried to help. They would call and invite me out for coffee or to their book club. I appreciated their efforts, but I could not bring myself to go. What would I say? How could I explain the gaping hole that had been torn in the fabric of my existence? They spoke of their grandchildren's soccer games and school recitals. I had nothing to contribute but a story of quiet abandonment and a bank account that had been padded with guilt money. My grief was too raw, too shameful to be aired out in a sunny coffee shop. One evening, about 2 weeks after he had left, I found myself sitting in his empty room. I had avoided it until now, but the pull was too strong. I sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress still holding the faint impression of his body. My eyes landed on the picture of Richard Maxwell on the mirror. In a sudden surge of impotent rage, I stood up, ripped the picture from the mirror, and tore it into tiny pieces. The act provided no relief, only a fresh wave of despair. I was fighting with a ghost, a man who had won without ever having to lift a finger. He had bought my grandson's love and loyalty, and there was nothing I could do about it. It was in that moment of utter desolation that I saw it. Tucked behind the dresser, almost completely out of sight, was a small, worn, leather-bound book. It was not one of his. It was old, something I had never seen before. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was a journal. I opened it to the first page, and the familiar loopy handwriting of my daughter, Sarah, stared back at me. The date on the first entry was from 18 years ago, just a few weeks before Leo was born. My heart stopped. This was a piece of the past I never knew existed, a story that had been hidden in the shadows of my own. I sank back onto the bed, the ripped pieces of Richard Maxwell's photo forgotten at my feet, and began to read.
The journal was a relic from a life I had only glimpsed in flashes of anger and despair. Sarah's handwriting, usually so wild and expressive, was small and cramped on the page, as if she were trying to contain the chaos of her thoughts. The first few entries were a torrent of fear and confusion. She wrote about the baby's father, a boy named Daniel, not a monster, but a kid just as lost as she was. He was the son of a stern, demanding man, Richard Maxwell, who had disowned him for wanting to be a musician instead of joining the family construction business. Daniel had been terrified of his father, and when Sarah told him she was pregnant, he had simply vanished, overwhelmed by the prospect of another failure in his father's eyes. As I turned the pages, a more complex picture of my daughter began to emerge. It was not a story of a young woman who didn't want her child, but one who felt profoundly, terrifyingly inadequate. She wrote about her love for the unborn baby, a fierce, protective love that was tangled up in a deep-seated self-loathing. "How can I be a mother?" one entry read. "I am a broken thing. All I will do is pass my brokenness on to him. He deserves better. He deserves a solid foundation, not a fault line." She wrote about me, her mother, with a mixture of reverence and shame. She saw me as the epitome of strength and stability, everything she was not. The plan she had formulated in her terrified 21-year-old mind was laid bare in the journal. Leaving Leo with me was not an act of abandonment in her eyes. It was an act of sacrifice. It was the ultimate, most painful act of motherly love she was capable of. She believed she was giving him his only chance at a good life, saving him from the chaos that was her own existence. "Mom will be his rock," she wrote, the ink slightly smeared as if from a tear. "She will build him a fortress of love that my ghosts can never penetrate. One day, when he is a man, he will understand. I am not leaving him. I am setting him free." Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut, recontextualizing every bitter memory I had of her flightiness and unreliability. She had tried to keep in touch with Daniel's family, not for her own sake, but for Leo's. She wrote about a single, harrowing phone call she made to Richard Maxwell a few months after Leo was born. She described a cold, dismissive man who accused her of trying to extort money from him. He denied that his son, Daniel, could possibly be the father and threatened her with legal action if she ever contacted him again. He had cut his own son off, and now he was cutting off his grandson, slamming the door on any possibility of connection. This was the self-made man Leo was now idolizing. A man who had built his empire on a foundation of cruelty and rejection. The journal continued sporadically over the years, a chronicle of her struggles with addiction and mental health. Her infrequent visits, which I had seen as disruptive and selfish, were revealed in her own words as desperate attempts to see the son she loved from a distance. She would get clean for a few weeks, her heart filled with a fragile hope, and drive to our town just to catch a glimpse of him playing in the park or walking home from school. She was too ashamed to approach, too terrified of disappointing him again. The cheap, inappropriate gifts were the best she could do. Small tokens from a ghost mother trying to prove she still existed.
My understanding of the past 17 years was shattering and reforming with every page I turned. My narrative had been simple. I was the savior, she was the mess. But the truth was infinitely more complex and heartbreaking. We had both been trying to save him, just in different ways. I had done it through presence. She had done it through absence. I had built the walls of the fortress, and she had stood guard outside, fighting her own dragons to keep them from ever reaching the gates. My resentment towards her, a feeling I had nurtured for nearly 2 decades,
dissolved into a profound, aching sorrow for the pain she had carried alone. The final entries were from just a few years ago. Her tone had shifted. There was a newfound clarity, a sense of peace. She wrote about being in a long-term recovery program, about finding a fragile stability. And she wrote about her biggest fear, that in saving Leo from her, she had also erased herself from his life completely. He knows Nana as his mother, she wrote, and that is how it should be. She earned that title. My only hope is that one day he will have room in his heart to understand the mother who loved him enough to let him go. The journal ended there. There were dozens of blank pages left, a future she had yet to write. I closed the book, my mind reeling. The tidy narrative of my martyrdom, of Leo's cruel repayment, was gone. It was replaced by a messy, tragic, and deeply human story of 3 generations caught in a web of fear, sacrifice, and misunderstood love. The anger I felt towards Leo began to soften, replaced by a dawning, painful understanding. He was not rejecting me. He was embracing a father figure, a legacy, a sense of identity that he had been denied his entire life. He was not trying to erase me. He was trying to fill a hole that I could never fill for him, the hole left by a father he never knew and a mother he never understood. The cream-colored envelope had not just offered him a fortune, it had offered him a history, a name, and he grabbed it with both hands. Armed with this new devastating understanding, I knew what I had to do. The silence between Leo and me was no longer a chasm of his making, but a void of misunderstanding that I now had the power to bridge. I spent the rest of the evening, not in anger or sorrow, but in action. I found a sturdy cardboard box and carefully placed Sarah's journal inside. Then I went through my old photo albums, selecting pictures that told the story I had always controlled. Me and a baby Leo. Me and a 5-year-old Leo at his kindergarten graduation. Me and the 10-year-old Leo holding up a fish he'd caught. I had curated our history to be a story about the 2 of us. Now I added the few photos I had of Sarah holding him as a newborn, her face a mixture of pure love and utter terror. Photos I had hidden away because they were too painful to look at. I was packing up the truth and sending it to him. The next morning, I drove to the post office and sent the package with overnight delivery to the Charleston address. I did not include a long explanatory letter. My words would only get in the way. Sarah's words were the ones he needed to hear. All I wrote on a small, simple card was, "I think you should have this. This is a part of your story, too. Love, Nana." It was an act of faith, a release of my tight-fisted control over our history. I was no longer the sole author of his life story. I was admitting that there were chapters I knew nothing about, and that his narrative was bigger and more complex than the one I had constructed for him within the 4 walls of our home. The waiting was excruciating, but it was a different kind of waiting. It was not the passive, painful waiting for a call that would never come. It was an active, hopeful waiting, the kind you do after planting a seed, knowing you have done all you can and now must trust in the sun and the rain. I spent the day cleaning the house, not as a chore, but as a way to reclaim my space. I opened the windows, letting the fresh air chase out the stale scent of grief. I put away the birthday decorations and finally cut a slice of the chocolate cake. It still tasted of love, but now it was a more expansive, less possessive love. It was a love that could make room for a complicated, messy truth. The call came the next afternoon.
His name flashed on my phone screen and my breath caught in my throat. I answered, my hand trembling. Nana. His voice was thick with emotion, cracked and raw. It was the voice of my grandson, not the cool, confident man of business he had been pretending to be. I could hear him trying to compose himself, the sound of a shaky inhale on the other end of the line. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I just listened to the sound of his breathing, a sound as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I got the package, he finally managed to say, his voice breaking. He was now crying, not the loud sobs of a child, but the quiet, ragged weeping of a man whose entire world has just been fundamentally altered. All these years, I thought she just didn't want me, he said. And this man, Richard, I thought he was someone to be proud of. He was cruel. He hurt my father and he hurt my mother. The shame and confusion in his voice were palpable. He was a boy adrift, the shiny new anchor of his Maxwell identity having crumbled to dust. I've been such a jerk, he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush of confession. This house, this money, it all felt like a prize. It felt like I had finally been chosen. I thought it made me better than the life I had, better than our house, better than you. He choked on that last word and the sob escaped him. But it wasn't a prize, it was just stuff. You were the prize, Nana. You were the one who chose me every single day. You were the one who built my entire world, and I threw it away for a ghost in a swimming pool. I am so sorry. His apology was not an excuse. It was a plea for forgiveness, raw and desperate and real. In that moment, all the pain of the last few weeks washed away. He was not a different person. He was my Leo, a good boy who had been temporarily blinded by the promise of a life he thought he was missing. He had been offered a fantasy, and it had taken the stark, painful truth to make him see the value of the reality he already possessed. We talked for over an hour, really talked, for what felt like an eternity. He told me he was selling the house in Charleston. He said he couldn't live in a place built on such a cold foundation. He was going to use the money to set up a trust for Sarah to make sure she was taken care of. And he was still going to the state college, just as we had always planned. He came home that weekend. When I opened the door, he didn't give me a quick, obligatory hug. He wrapped his arms around me and held on tight, his face buried in my shoulder. And for a few moments, he was just my 17-year-old grandson again. Our relationship is different now. It's not broken, but it has been reforged in the fires of this painful ordeal, and it is stronger for it. There is an honesty between us that wasn't there before. He is not just my grandson anymore. He is a man who understands the complex, often painful sacrifices that were made for him. He repaid me not by giving me money for a new roof, but by finally seeing the truth that the house I built for him was never made of wood and nails, but of unwavering, unconditional love. And that is a home he can always, always come back to.